Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi romance movie called Bliss. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens inside an IT firm, where floor manager Greg Whittle is engrossed in his daydreams. He is sketching pictures of a beautiful place that he thinks only exists in his imagination. These sketches are incredibly detailed, and Greg seems to be able to visualize them as if they were real. Shortly after, his daughter Emily calls him and invites him to her graduation ceremony during the weekend. Greg is a bit hesitant, as he has other plans, but he eventually agrees to come to her special day. As soon as the phone call is over, Greg goes back to his sketching. His habit of mentally switching off while at work has been causing his colleagues a lot of trouble. This earns him a visit to the CEO Bjorn's office, where he is fired on the spot. Hearing the news leaves Greg stunned, but he slowly drifts back in his state of daydreaming. The boss, who is worried by his absent-mindedness, approaches to comfort him, but right at this moment, Greg suddenly bolts up, causing Bjorn to be startled. He trips backwards and hits his head on the edge of his desk. Greg comes back to his senses and checks on his boss, only to find that the latter has no pulse. Afraid that he will be blamed for Bjorn's death, he desperately searches for a way to escape or to hide the body. He hangs Bjorn's sleeves over the window to prop him up, then covers his body with the curtain. Greg then leaves the office in the pretense of grabbing something for lunch. Following this, he arrives at a nearby bar and immediately orders a double shot of whiskey to drown his worries. He is impatiently waiting for the drink when he spots a woman looking at him rather curiously. The woman waves her hand a few times, making the sounds in the bar momentarily muffled. When Greg notices what she's doing, the woman approaches him and calls him a real person. She then introduces herself as Isabel and invites him to her booth. Confused, Greg joins her at her table, where she points out how Bjorn's body is visible from where they're sitting. Isabel offers to help, claiming that she feels responsible for this whole situation. In exchange, she asks him to retrieve a yellow amulet from her ex-boyfriend, who's immune to her powers just like Greg is. A confused Greg, who has been listening patiently, has no idea what she is talking about. So, Isabel clarifies that unlike them, most of the people they are seeing currently aren't real. These people are simply a part of a simulation that she built. Greg is still doubtful, but he has no choice other than to do what she says. In the bathroom, he finds Isabel's ex-boyfriend, who seems to have passed out drunk. In his hand is the yellow amulet, which Isabel claims has special crystals that can manipulate this fake world. Greg retrieves it with ease and returns it to her. Now that he fulfilled his end of the bargain, Isabel promises to fix his problem. She grabs his hand, closes her eyes, and suddenly the sun outside glows brighter. Bjorn's body slides down from the office window and drops onto the pavement below. Stunned, Greg hurriedly rushes out of the bar and goes to the scene. His coworkers witnessed the event, and they now believe that Boss Man jumped to his death. Following this, Isabel sells Greg's phone and takes him to a homeless community on the side of a bridge. She asks him to stay here until Bjorn's case is closed. Greg wants to go home instead, but he left all his money, keys, and ID behind in the office. He also clarifies that he was staying at a motel because he recently got divorced. Isabel then encourages him to just return to his life once it's safe. That evening, Greg laments that Bjorn was a good person and he didn't deserve to die. Isabel empathizes with his feelings, but she insists that Bjorn wasn't a real person. To demonstrate what she means, Isabel hands him a lighter and asks him to light a bunch of candles a few feet away. Greg, although confused, takes the lighter and visualizes himself doing the task. To his utter surprise, the candles light up one by one. This seemingly proves Isabel's point. This world is a simulation, and they are actually real people who can manipulate the world. Either that, or this movie is an analogy for meth addiction. During dinner, Greg shows his sketches to Isabel and points out how the details come naturally to him. They all belong to a woman with a cigarette in her hand who looks like Isabel. She then reveals that his sketches are their real lives outside of this fake world. The next day, Emily visits her brother Arthur and reveals that she had asked their father to attend her graduation, but Arthur doesn't want anything to do with them and even points out the many times when Greg has been an absent father. Elsewhere, Greg spends the day with Isabel, who shares the yellow crystals with him. They head to a local ice rink and have a complete blast, skating around and making hanging out in the bathroom. They also use their telekinesis powers to punish perverted men. It is obvious that Greg no longer feels any guilt regarding Bjorn's death and is beginning to trust Isabel more and more. Later, as they head to a fast food restaurant, Isabel spots a car pull up a few meters ahead of them. The man inside is looking for women who would have coitus for money. She talks to the man, while Greg heads into the restaurant to pick up their lunch. When he notices that he doesn't have enough money, he checks outside for Isabel and is surprised to see her getting into the car and leaving. Greg then excuses himself from the restaurant, unaware that his son Arthur is sitting nearby. Several hours pass, but Greg waits for Isabel outside the restaurant. The cashier from the restaurant even pities him and hands him a bag of stale food. Finally, Isabel arrives, and he shares the food with her without asking any questions. Later that evening, Isabel leaves Greg by the street while she heads into a shady apartment. She meets up with her ex-boyfriend Kendo and asks him to return her amulet with yellow crystals. In the meantime, Emily finds her dad and tearfully asks him to come with her. Greg insists on waiting, saying he has a friend who will arrive shortly. He promises Emily that he'll attend her graduation, but the teenager reveals that the ceremony was 2 weeks ago. Seeing that her father is confused, she leaves him her number on the back of her graduation photo. Moments later, Isabel, who had seen the father-daughter duo talking, returns. She tells Greg to forget about Emily since she's not a real human, but this only enrages him, and the two get into a light argument. As this is happening, a shady-looking van pulls up near them. The man inside has a gun and begins to demand money from them. Enraged, Greg takes a few yellow crystals from Isabel's amulet and crushes the van using his telekinetic powers. But this causes him to vomit, as he just used a lot of his mental power in one go. The scene shifts to the next morning, where Greg wakes up in Isabel's tent, but doesn't find her anywhere. He sees his sketches hung up nearby and immediately collects them before going to take a stroll. Greg soon arrives at a payphone and calls Emily using the number she left behind on her photo. However, the call is unanswered, and Greg is forced to drop a message on her voicemail. When he finally returns back to the tent, Isabel berates him for leaving her. It is revealed that someone stole all the yellow crystals while both of them were away. When Isabel learns that Greg also took his drawings, she accuses him of wanting to abandon her. These suspicions are strengthened when she finds Emily's photo in his pocket. She then stresses that this world is not real, and he's getting dragged back into the illusion. To prove her point, Isabel whips out a test tube containing several blue crystals. She says these crystals were specifically designed to eject them out of this fake world and back into the real world. They need 10 crystals each, but they're short by 4. However, Isabel is now desperate as she feels that Greg is slipping away from reality. She thus puts the crystals into a grinding device and instructs him to put it in his nose. Greg is a bit hesitant, but he has no choice but to oblige. Shortly after, he wakes up in a lab with a tube in his nose, which connects him to a machine known as the brain box. Isabel also wakes up in a similar position in the seat next to his. A technician, who is monitoring the brain box, refers to Isabel as Dr. Clemens and asks her if everything is okay. She replies that Greg got attached to a fake human in the simulation, so she intentionally ejected them from it. The attendant then walks up to Greg, calling him Dr. Whittle, and detaches him from the brain box. Next, the couple heads out, and Greg is stunned to see they're in a large, peaceful facility. They're soon approached by 2 scientists who wonder if their program is experiencing any troubles, but Isabel assures them that there isn't any problem before walking away. Then they head into town, and Greg wonders why he doesn't remember this world. Isabel explains that it's a common side effect of being in the brain box for a long time. She then shows him a place by the sea that's exactly like the serene view in his drawings. Greg is now slowly starting to realize this is their actual home. In the afternoon, Greg asks if the world has always been this perfect. Isabel replies that it was previously ridden with pollution and poverty, but it all changed when they discovered automation, synthetic biology, and asteroid mining. To trigger his memory, Isabel fetches a device called the Thought Visualizer, which apparently Greg invented. The device converts the user's statements into a live animation. Using the Thought Visualizer, Isabel explains how synthetic biology fixed their environmental problems, while asteroid mining restarted the economy. People shared their wealth with everyone, and soon they created automated robots who did the tedious tasks. With all the money and time, people could explore their passions. And then they became truly useless. As the years passed by, humans got so used to their spectacular world that they slowly started being unappreciative of the wonderful things around them. This is why Isabel created the brain box, so that people could truly appreciate how bad their world could be. That evening, the duo attends a function where renowned scientists and artists have gathered. They meet with celebrated scientist Dr. Nye, who compliments Greg's thought visualizer. Afterwards, Dr. Nye approaches Greg for a private talk and raises his concern over the brain box project.
Anyway, see ya. Gotta go on Kai Cenat's stream now,
says Dr. Nye. Isabel, who had noticed the two talking in a hushed tone, later asks Greg what they were discussing. It is obvious that she is aware of how people are skeptical about the brain box project, and it makes her extremely angry. Unbeknownst to anyone, an apparition of Emily has now entered the party and is looking for her dad. Later on that week, Isabel speaks about her project in a public function. She calls Greg to the stage and explains to the audience that he was asked a series of questions before he went into the brain box. Isabel will now ask the same questions and compare his answers to his previous ones. She then fires off a series of questions, and Greg's answers clearly point to his changed perspective on their world. He was irritable and bored before, but now, having been in the simulation, he is extremely grateful and happy. The presentation is a success, and Isabel draws a lot of attention after her speech, but as she is surrounded by a group of admirers, Greg gets lured out of the party by the apparition of Emily. While he's following her, something weird begins to happen. Their pristine venue is suddenly being littered with graffiti and trash. Emily, on the other hand, finally talks to Greg, stressing that she's his daughter and that he's not thinking clearly. Emily explains that she found him in a homeless tent with weird yellow crystals in his hands. She returns those crystals and reveals that he has to choose which world he wants, this perfect world or the broken world where his children live. Suddenly, Greg hears Isabel shouting for help and rushes downstairs only to find the party in chaos. This prompts him to take one yellow crystal and use his telekinetic power to push the crowd away from Isabel. Greg then pulls her out of the party, and they see that the simulated world that existed inside the brain box is now mixing with their idyllic world. A confused Greg asks what's happening, to which Isabel reveals that exiting the brain box using insufficient blue crystals might have caused this. They now have to return to the simulation and get the right amount of blue crystals again. Moments later, the duo gets back to the lab and hooks themselves up to the machine. They soon wake up back in the homeless tent in the simulation. They then immediately head to Kendo's building, as he is the only one who can manufacture the blue crystals. Once they reach there, Isabel grabs a nearby pistol and threatens Kendo to give them as many blue crystals as possible. Isabel is now on edge, and when Kendo reaches for his pocket, she shoots him. She then takes a packet of blue crystals from his back pocket and heads back to the tent with Greg. Unfortunately, the sound of the gunshot has alerted local policemen who are now entering the building. Greg and Isabel then race to the rooftop and climb down the fire escape. Once they are out, they head to their tent in a stolen car. But things go from bad to worse as they realize they still don't have enough blue crystals. The police have also located them, and the duo is forced to duck for cover. With not enough crystals, only one can wake up to the real world, while the other has to stay. Greg suggests that she kill him so that he can automatically wake up in the real world, but the latter is not sure if that will work. Isabel weeps as she feels guilty for creating the simulated world they're stuck in, but Greg reminds her of all the great times they had in this world, expressing his love for its unpredictability. He then decides to stay back and tells her to return as soon as possible. Isabel is devastated by the turn of events, but she has no choice but to accept his decision. After bidding each other farewell, Isabel surrenders to the police, which allows Greg enough time to escape. Just as she's surrounded by the police, she uses the device to wake up in her real world. In the aftermath of this event, Greg realizes that he's stuck in the simulation. He goes to a rehab clinic and joins a support group where he talks about his family and his life. The movie comes to an end as he meets up with his daughter Emily, who is happy to see him again. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.